You told me you were going to be gentle. Okay. And I'll do this straight down the barrel, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Zaki just did my makeup, and I asked him to keep this makeup bib on me to tell you one of the greatest stories I ever heard. I was shooting Great Balls of Fire in London, England, and my makeup artist came to me and told me I just had the worst week of my life. Last week, I was doing a TV, well, she has an English accent. She said, last week I was doing a TV movie and one of the makeup people was sick, and I had to take over and do the makeup for Sir Laurence Olivier. I was so nervous. I wanted to make a good impression on him. And he came up to me before the shoot and said, listen, my dear, don't be nervous. No, sir, no, nothing. Just call me Larry. So Larry sat in my makeup chair, and I put the makeup bib on me. Can you see all of me here? Put the makeup bib on him like this, and I began doing his makeup, and then suddenly underneath the blanket, I start seeing this, and I become furious, and I say, I don't care if you are Sir fucking Laurence Olivier, I'm not going to have you wanking off in my chair. And she pulled the blanket off, and he was cleaning his glasses. She told me she had never been so humiliated in her life. She wanted to make a good impression. Now, I wanted to continue with this story because, in a way, it is the essence of Freud's view of comedy. The essence of Freud's view of comedy is making the meaningful meaningless, which is what that story does. I tell this story because this is the essence of Freud's view of comedy. And if I could put it in one sentence, is that it makes the meaningful meaningless. And in this case, we have several layers of meaning. One layer of meaning is the discussion of Sir Laurence Olivier, that you actually have a title, where you have, at that time, the most famous actor in the world, and you have decorum on a set of a costumer who wanted to make a good impression on Sir Larry. And then you make that meaningless by accusing him of being a filthy old wanker whacking off in her chair, when actually all he was doing was cleaning his glasses, which again makes her meaning meaningless. So you actually have a double joke, which Sigmund Freud would have appreciated. I couldn't have thought of a worse introduction to meeting Laurence Olivier. That is so, you filthy old wanker. How on earth did I ever get to Sigmund Freud being a comic, a comedian? I had just been to the doctor in Dallas, Texas, which is where I grew up, and I was resting in bed, and I had one of these books. Well, actually, I have the book here. From college. I never read it. Sigmund Freud, Jokes in Their Unconscious. I bought it at the bookstore to get an idea how old this book is. The price on this book is $1.95. Right now, you can't buy a stamp for $1.95. So I was recuperating in my childhood home, in my childhood bed, and I thought, well, let me read one of these childhood books that I never read when I was in college. And I began reading it, and I went, oh my goodness, it's the holy grail of comedy. It explains so much what there have been so many books written on comedy, so many theories on comedy, but it's never been said so succinctly as by Freud in those, I guess they were lectures he did in Munich in 1905. And ever since then, I've been teaching them in my comedy class. Well, when you're an actor, there are all sorts of people who come up with ideas as to what makes something funny or not funny. When I read Freud's book, no one ever said it clearer or more succinctly that comedy is making the meaningful meaningless, and conversely making the meaningless meaningful. And I can give you examples. In my life, in the kind of scripts I deal with, I think that there are two kinds of comedy. And I've made up these terms, so just take it with a grain of salt. There's comedy of relation, and comedy of creation. And I made those terms up because they rhyme. Comedy of relation is like Seinfeld, is like using the collective unconsciousness to talk about planes and food and lunches and stewardesses. Comedy of creation is like Monty Python's Flying Circus, of where you throw the laws of physics up into the air, nothing really exists, and you have the Ministry of Silly Walks, you have the Black Knight who gets his arms and legs and head cut off, and we're going to have a driverless car. So the most important thing I gleaned from Freud and his view of comedy was that one simple line that comedy makes the meaningful meaningless, or conversely, making the meaningless meaningful. And from that, I could see the entire outline of comedy that we get here in Hollywood break down in front of me. I teach a class in comedy in which I use Freud. And I've made up some categories based on it. I see that there are two worlds of comedy, comedy of relation and comedy of creation, and I just made those words up. So because they rhyme, you don't have to take them seriously. This is my theory, not Freud's. But comedy of relation is like Seinfeld, Jerry Seinfeld, in which we talk about the collective unconsciousness, things we all understand like lunch and cars and stewardesses and airplanes, those kind of things. And the humor is that we all understand and have agreement. And then there is comedy of creation, which I consider like Monty Python's Flying Circus, in which you throw all laws of physics up in the air, and you have the Ministry of Silly Walks, and you have the Black Knight who gets his arms and legs and head cut off, and you just have a head on the ground saying, "Come on back here, it's just a flesh wound." So you have these two worlds of comedy. Now, in both of these worlds, you get your laughs the same way Freud suggests you do, by making the meaningful meaningless or the meaningless meaningful. And in those groups of comedy, there are kind of three categories that I've found. There's farce that Freud talks about. There is farce, there is satire, and slapstick. Again, millions of different opinions as to what these mean. This is just my opinion. Farce is comedy of priority, in which you make things important that should not be important, or take things which should be important and neglect them. So you would find 90% of all American sitcoms fall into the category of farce. Then you have satire, which Freud talks about as comedy of form. And my best example of satire is Saturday Night Live Weekend Update, where they pretend to be, you have the form of a newscast. And the way you make satire effective is by filling the form as accurately as you can. Now, Freud has a very interesting point he made in 1905 in Munich in these lectures, and that is satire is the form of comedy that has the shortest shelf life. And he brings up several jokes in his book. He said these about a marriage like a Yentl, you know, someone who plans weddings, the marriage. He said this was a profession that existed in my parents' generation, but no longer exists. So you can see how quickly satire is gone. And if anyone doesn't believe that, just watch some reruns of Saturday Night Live, Weekend Update, and you have no idea what they're talking about. Who is Earl Butz? Who is Franco? Nobody knows who these people are anymore that they used to make jokes about just 10 years ago. So Freud was right there. And then the final form of comedy is slapstick, which the way I define it is a central character with a whirlwind going around that central character. And that whirlwind could be either physical, as in a Buster Keaton comedy, and he's in the center of it, or it could be emotional. And I think of a slapstick as like, an emotional slapstick is like Sex and the City, where you have those women kind of in the middle and the men revolve and the craziness in the world revolve around them. But in each case, whether it is slapstick, whether it is satire, whether it is farce, In each case, there is a specific way in which what is meaningful becomes meaningless or vice versa. So it always comes back to Freud. I have found that wisdom is timeless. I have found that some of the notes on comedy written in Shakespeare's time and some of the notes in comedy written afterwards are just as pertinent today as not, if they are true. That's important. There was something George Meredith said, who was an English novelist, I believe in the 18th century. George Meredith said, comedy only exists where there is civilization. This is something I think Sigmund Freud would also agree with. What Freud talks about in his book so much is the structure of a joke. And he mentions the joke is the marriage of unlikely partners in which you are trying to show a unity. Ooh, it sounds an awful lot like quantum physics, doesn't it? Unlikely partners trying to find a unity where we have quarks in the unified field theory. Here's an example of a joke. For example, a king is riding out in the woods with his hunting party looking for elk, and he has his bow and arrow, and a serf runs out of the woods and says, "Sire, sire, don't shoot, I'm not an elk, I'm not an elk." And the king draws his bow and shoots the serf right in the heart and kills him. Well, the king's assistant said, "My lord, why did you do that? He clearly said he was not an elk." And the king said, "Oh, did he? I thought he said he was an elk." So you have a very unlikely marriage here, Freud would say, in this simple joke. The basis of the joke is an attack on class system. It's actually a very profound joke on how tone deaf leaders are to the common man, to the point of killing them, and how the advisors around those in power have no power to advise. It's actually a very profound joke, and it makes an unlikely marriage that makes us see truth. Now, Freud talked about the purpose of jokes like this. And in marrying Freud with George Meredith's idea that civilization is the basis of comedy, Freud said the purpose of all comedy is human freedom. That the purpose of any joke is to expose freedom, which is interesting. A friend of mine, Sarah Silverman, is an example of a comic who uses all sorts of blue language and everything. Of course, Sarah, when she was a child, that's how she got a lot of affection, was being the kid with the dirtiest mouth in the world. But again, her comedy, the idea that she's this beautiful woman who can say horrible things, is an example of freedom, verbal freedom. Freud talks about one of the most important things in comedy is the structure of a joke and the specificity of language. And he underscores something that Shakespeare says, that the essence of comedy is brevity. Have you heard that joke, what is the essence of comedy? Have you heard that joke? No? Ask me what the essence of comedy is.
Would you please tell me
timing.
What the essence? Would you please tell
timing.
Me? Would you please
timing. That's the essence of comedy. And Freud would say this is a perfect joke because you are using one word in incorrect timing to illustrate timing, which makes the meaningful, which you asking me, what is the essence of comedy, and you're not able to get the question out because I'm answering your question. I'm making your question meaningless. So Freud would say, this is the essence of comedy. And it also underscores the idea of freedom in that it punctures the expert in this case, the fact that I cannot hear the question. I become very similar to that king who couldn't hear the poor serf saying, help, help. Freud said that humor is used to show a light on power and authority. example of another joke Freud would like. We're in a country club, and there are 3 women in the tennis club who are in the dressing room, and suddenly a man runs through the dressing room completely naked with a paper bag over his head. The first woman, and all the women are looking at the dingle-dangles, and the first woman said, "Well, that's not my husband." The second woman says, "No, it certainly isn't." And the third woman is, "He doesn't even belong to this club." Again, we make the meaningful meaningless in that we have a tennis club and we have a hierarchy of society and civilization. And we have a breakdown, first of all, of the first woman of a marriage. "That's not my husband." "No, it certainly isn't," the second woman commenting. And then you have the third woman that really says that this hoity-toity club is not so hoity-toity after all. She's been pulling the train with everybody there in the club. Let me answer this other question you asked. How does Freud practically work today when you deal with comedy? I am working now on a new series for Comedy Central. And one of the first things I do now when I look at the script is I say, where is the meaning? And in fact, where is the civilization? And you know, the old Jewish comics would say there's always the schlemiel and the schlemazel. If you've heard of that, the schlemiel always spills the soup. The schlemazel gets the soup spilled on him. But it requires both of them to have comedy. In the words of George Meredith, it requires civilization. So I look at a script now and I say, where is the civilization? Where is the meaning? And how does that meaning become meaningless? Am I the one who carries the meaning, or am I the schlemiel, the one who's going to spill the soup in this scene? For example, in Groundhog Day, in the scenes I had with Bill Murray, for the most part, and this is why he's such a great actor, in the first scenes with me in that movie, Bill Murray carries the world. He carries meaning. I am carrying meaningless. I am Ned, and I come up to him and I am outside the realm of civilization and society, which makes it funny. But those scenes would not be funny if Bill Murray did not carry meaning. And what is so artful about that movie is just on a dime, Bill is able to switch in later scenes and he becomes the aberration to society, stuffing food in his mouth at the diner, feeling like he is immune to the effects of time. Again, that movie, Groundhog Day, demonstrates making the meaningful time meaningless. Freud. I'm not an expert on Freud. Of course, I studied him in college and read some of his letters and saw several movies about Freud. But to me, the greatest contribution he seemed to have made from a non-expert point of view is that he was one of the first people who opened up the idea that the key to the human is the mind. And differentiating between the id, which is me, and the ego, which is right the way we see the world and what we need in the world, and the superego, which is civilization. He broke down the ideas in which the common man could understand his own life better, could understand the chains that were wrapped around him better, and had a tool to free himself. And also he helped with comedy. When I look at those comedic forms, again, these are arbitrary categories because there's certainly many hybrid categories of comedy into farce, slapstick, and satire. I'm also a writer. So I often keep in mind, don't write satire. Don't write a joke that involves satire because, as Freud said, it has the shortest shelf life in the world. If you write a joke that deals with current affairs, current events, just know in 5 years it's dead. No one will know what you're talking about. Whereas if you writing jokes and writing ideas that have to do with farce and even slapstick can be eternal, because all of us feel like we're in the middle of a whirlwind, like in slapstick, and often we're in situations in which priorities are askew, like in farce. So I find I mainly use those guideposts for writing, and I try to stick to farce, try to stick to slapstick. I see people using Freud all the time, but they don't know they're using Freud. And I teach a class in comedy and in improv. And when I teach my students about Freud, it completely changes their outlook on show business. I get so many emails from ex-students every week about, this makes it so much simpler to take a look at a script and see, am I the meaning or am I the meaninglessness? Which I carry. It makes script breaking down scripts so much easier. And also, if you're a director, it makes breaking down scripts and working with actors so much easier. Because you know, if you are setting up a joke, that you have to create the world and meaningfulness, and you make sure that those actors don't play it goofy during that. They have to play it straight. You know, you can get laughs playing it straight. I wore this shirt in honor of you, in honor of Freud, in that his ideas have trickled down into popular culture. And I don't know if you can get a close-up of this shirt. This is a shirt assigned to, I don't normally wear t-shirts to interviews, but this one's special. This is a t-shirt of the food chain. And you see it begins with plants, animals, humans, zombies. Freud, this is Freudian in terms of comedy in several ways. First of all, it is taking meaningful, which is science, and making it meaningless. And it does it in using not only a scientific archetype of the food chain, it also even comes down to the font. Remember what I was saying about satire, is that it is comedy of form. This is, I am wearing satire. This is comedy of form. And for satire to work, you have to be true to the form, meaning you have to have a font which looks like it would be used in scientific things. You have to have pictures which have to look like they are scientific, including the zombie picture up on top. So this is a perfect example. Now, this shirt will become obsolete after the zombie apocalypse. And there are no more humans. The zombies, you know, will be sitting at home going like, what are humans? Oh, son, grandfather used to eat those. You know, so that goes way back. But again, it shows you how short-lived satire is. Satire is something that is an immediate hit, but is to be avoided generally, I have found.